This audio presentation of Hi Dad is brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction. Written by Herbert Ewing Duncan. Executive producers: Scottish Rite Grand Commander James D. Cole, 33rd degree. Grandmaster of DeMolay John Sellars and DeMolay Grand Secretary Stephen E. Crane. Narrated and produced by Matt Bowers, 32nd degree. Consulting producer Dean Alban, 33rd degree. Hi Dad Book, copyright 1981. Audio recordings copyright 2023. All rights reserved. For information on how you can donate to support this audio serial, visit DeMolay.org. Chapter 3. 9 Boys and a Man. As an architect slowly creates the beauty of a building from the first rough sketches to the fullness of design, or as music develops from a melody first heard in the heart, so did the prophecy of Nell Land grow into reality during the years from 1914 to 1919. The position offered to Frank Land, and which he gratefully accepted, was to slowly evolve into the formation of the Order of DeMolay. These were the years of World War I. Even before America entered the conflict, the people of the nation were swept with a passionate desire to bring democracy to a world that seemed on the brink of disaster. When our nation joined the Allies in the fight against German power, every resource of men and material was poured into the conflict. But America was to suffer on the home front as the call for ever-increasing sacrifice was given to help the fight in the trenches. Wide areas of unemployment opened. There were lesser and greater periods of depression, creating uncertainty, need, and privation. A positive response to this critical civilian situation in Kansas City came in September of 1914 with the formation of the Scottish Rite Employment Bureau. A year later, this bureau was expanded to include all interested Masons and members of the sister organizations. As the war progressed, this program, under the name of the Masonic Relief Committee, was enlarged to include direct relief in the form of food and clothing to all who were in need regardless of race or creed. The Scottish Rite Building Committee granted the free use of offices and equipment to assist in economically carrying on the work and, in addition, providing a large storeroom in the basement where provisions of food and clothing, new and used, could be stored. Funds for the operation were provided by donations from the various lodges and individual members of Masonic groups. To supplement these donations, a charity ball was held each year in Convention Hall. Frank Land, in his new work as full-time executive secretary, was to administer this program. Before selecting Frank Land to serve as administrator of both the Employment Bureau and Masons Relief, John H. Glazier, as chairman of the committee, had talked to Judge Alexander G. Cochran, Sovereign Grand Inspector General for the Scottish Rite in Missouri, and William P. Osgood. They agreed they had found the ideal man for the position. He was in his early 20s with a successful business career in back of him. He was largely self-educated, but possessed a power of organization and an ever-responsive interest in people. He was ideal for the position and gave of himself, without restraint. He responded with enthusiasm to this program of doing something for white-collar and blue-shirted people caught in the trying financial conditions of the time. The years were busy interviewing those who came to the office, distributing supplies and raising funds. The employment area of his work from its beginning to January of 1923 resulted in the securing of 15,971 positions. In 1 year, 11,306 parcels of food were distributed with an estimated value of $18,000, while 1,581 packages of clothing were given to those in need, including new clothing valued at $9,000 and used clothing of $3,000. Charles A. Boyce, who knew him during these years, said of Frank, "He acted as though he had found something that he had been looking for as a means of expressing his brotherly love, his compassion for those in trouble, and his desire to help his fellows. He was a kindly man, never too busy to listen to the problems of those seeking help. People naturally turned to him for advice and for a solution to their troubles. He had a friendly interest in people and a magnetic personality that enabled him to make friends with those he met. Young and old, rich and poor, they had a high regard for him and placed their confidence in him. Still, as time passed, his activities as one of the outstanding social service executives in Kansas City failed to completely fill his groping desire to be of service. The war finally came to an end, and he became concerned with the problems of the boys who had lost their fathers. He remembered his own boyhood, the loneliness and the craving for some man to talk with, a man who could provide inspiration and challenge. His first efforts were modeled on the Chicago Big Brother movement, whereby a business or professional man would take an interest in a certain boy, be a companion to him, advise him, and possibly provide employment. Frank, with his wide acquaintance among the leaders of the city, tried a score of times to bring about such combinations of man and boy, but each attempt was a doubtful benefit. The Big Brothers were busy men, sometimes involved in other matters when the boys needed them and the boys didn't go back. Slowly the thought occurred to him that the answer for boys was association with other boys. It has been said that a day can be changed or a great moment launched by a single phone call. Such a call came in January of 1919. As Frank answered the telephone, he recognized the voice of Sam Freet, newly installed senior warden of Ivanhoe Lodge. "Frank, I have a favor to ask. One of our members, Elmer E. Lower, who had been initiated as a fellowcraft, died a year ago, I believe on January 3rd. He is survived by his wife and 4 children who are now from 6 to 17 years old. It is a courageous family. The mother has been wonderful in holding the family together. She has found employment as a matron at the General Hospital, but that is not enough to finance the family. Could you find a part-time job for the oldest boy, Louis? He is one of the finest young men I have ever seen. I have talked to him and admire his self-confidence and his determination to continue his high school work. Could you possibly find a place for him? Sam, you called at just the right time. Your request might be the answer to one of my problems, for I have been looking for someone to help here in the office. I would be glad to talk to this boy. I am sorry to hear this about Elmer Lower's family. I read of his death, but I did not really know him. I met him a few times and was impressed by his personality. He was a fine man. As I remember, he was an accountant and served a term or 2 as a Republican alderman for the 10th Ward in the City Council. Send Louis to me. Say after school tomorrow if you can arrange it. I shall look forward to meeting him." The next afternoon, Louis arrived promptly for his interview. Shaking hands with this youth brought a response to land that seemed to blend into a common experience that would unite them for years to come. Louis radiated an honesty of character, a natural aptitude for leadership, and the grace of movement of an athlete. Frank noticed that they were of the same height, of what was then called average, a few inches under 6 feet. The boy's hair was brown, cut short and smoothed back with a high part on the right side. The forehead was high, and his blue eyes gave the indication of friendliness to complete the ever-present smile about his lips. His clothing showed wear, and its size had not kept pace with his years, but there was a touch of the immaculate about him. Frank thought, if I had a son, I would want him to be just like this lad. They talked for a while about school. Louis told him of his aspirations for a place on the track team, of his position as a pitcher on a baseball team, and in response to a question said, "I am a fairly good student. Even with the hard time we are having, I want to finish high school and then help with the education of the others." It is a good goal. You will meet the challenge. Now, tell me about your father. I knew him but only from very casual meetings. Louis hesitated as though reluctant to look into the past, but finally said, "My father was the finest father a boy could ever have. He was a businessman who loved to hunt and fish. He took me on many an outing, and I went with him many times into the country. Those were great times, but I always noticed that a bad leg would give him a hard time of it. He had difficulty with that leg ever since it was injured when he was a farm boy in Pettis County, near Longwood, Missouri. On our last trip together, when we were on a hunting trip in Cass County, just south of here, he injured that leg again. It was not a gun accident. He apparently slipped on muddy ground in a ravine and twisted it. Infection set in and he was in St. Joseph Hospital for a long time before he died. I suppose that they will someday find a way of stopping such infection and pain, but the doctors were unable to save his life. He was buried in Mount Washington Cemetery. Since then, my mother has found work, and now I would like to find some kind of work to help at home. I tried to sell papers and to find odd jobs in the neighborhood, but they are not enough. Mr. Land, can you find a place for me? Yes, I can. I need someone to help me here. As of now, you have a job for after-school hours and on Saturday. That evening, as the dinner dishes were being cleared, Nell said, Frankie, something happened today. You look like you have found a long-lost friend. Not a long-lost friend, but a new young friend. This boy I talked to today is tremendous, one of the finest young men I have ever met. He is going to work with me in the office, and I know I shall enjoy having him around. Perhaps we could take him to church with us Wednesday evening. The teachings of Christian Science would be good for him, and you could meet Louis Lower. Yes, we should do just that, she replied. I suggest that you have him bring a few friends over to the apartment some evening. I would like to meet him, and as you know, we all respond best and open up more when we are with our friends. It was not until the middle of February that the opportunity for such a meeting took place. Richard B. Fowler, editorial writer for The Star, in a series of articles entitled Leaders of Our Town, tells of the casual conversation between Frank Land and Louis Lower that happened to make history. Louis, said Mr. Land, who do you run around with? I have some friends around home out at 28th and Indiana, said Louis. How would you like to form a club and meet here at the temple? Mr. Fowler continued. Louis thought the idea had possibilities and showed up the next week with 8 other boys. Over sodas from the ice cream place across the street, the idea of a club took definite form. That was February 19th, 1919. The boys came early that Wednesday evening, and each in turn was introduced to Mr. Land by Louis Lower with, I want you to meet Ralph Sewell. He lives at our home. Here is Elmer Dorsey. His home is just in back of our house. Edmund Marshall lives next door to Elmer, and this fellow is Jerome Jacobson, who lives in the next block. This is William Steinhibler, and here is Ivan Bentley. They also live in our neighborhood, as does Gorman McBride, whom you know. He has brought his cousin, Clyde Stream, with him. There are 9 of us. Louis Lower had chosen his friends well. They were all about his own age of 17, with 1 or 2 a few years older. Without exception, they were good-looking boys, alert, honest, and wholesome. They came from middle-income families where the tight pinch of money at times served only as a spur to bolster their dreams of what they might do in the future. They were a group destined to form a great youth organization, and each was to advance through his efforts and determination to prominence in his chosen field of work. Mr. Land acknowledged each introduction with a handshake and word of welcome. Turning to Gorman, he said, I have heard of you through your father, George McBride. He is the secretary, you know, of the Scottish Rite Firemen and Policemen's Club. It was good of you to bring Clyde. Then turning to the others, he said, Before we get down to business, let's take a tour of this building. I think you will find it just about right if we should decide to form a club and use it as a meeting place. The boys had never seen such a building. They were awed by the attractive and beautiful surroundings of the Scottish Rite Temple. Their own homes were modest in size, with the simplest of furnishings, and here they found a setting such as to make one boy say, Gee, this takes my breath away. The building located at the northwest corner of 15th and Troost was a handsome structure. From its heavy paneled oak entrance doors set in carved stone jambs terminating in a Norman pediment of fleur-de-lis, to the battlements of a pierced cornice, to the dark oak beams of the main room, it was a thrilling example of the time in history when mankind had depth of purpose and dedication to great ideals. The boys went from room to room. They were fascinated by the great hall with a stage complete with proscenium arch, backdrops and stage settings, and an overhanging balcony with carved linen fold railings. On the lower floor, they found a great ballroom with small alcoves for intimate gatherings and adjacent to it, a kitchen. The boys, in their minds, could imagine how ideal this would be for dances, dinners, and entertainment. Long before the tour was completed, the boys were convinced that a club in this building would not only be perfect, but they liked this quiet man leading their group from room to room. Only 10 or 12 years older than they were, he was one of them, but his knowledge and confidence set him apart even as the difference of age seemed to vanish. It was a radiant group that gathered about the long table in one of the meeting rooms that night. There was no doubt that they should continue to meet as a club. The only question was a name. One suggested they use Greek letters as the college fraternities did, but this was instantly voted down as making them only a part of other organizations. The name must be distinctive and carry meaning. They turned to Land for suggestions. He pointed to a recent series of prints on the wall that showed the adventures of Sir Galahad and the Knights of the Round Table. There was a negative shaking of heads. The greatest of wars had ended only a few months before, and the adventures of knights of old seemed far away. The names were mentioned from history and from the Bible. Stories such as Damon and Pythias, David and Jonathan, and of Nathan Hale. Nothing seemed to click until one of the boys, Clyde Stream, said, "Mr. Land, tell us something connected with masonry. There must be great names, and we are meeting here in one of their buildings." Frank smiled. "This year I am serving as the head of one of the Masonic groups. I am the commander for the DeMolay Council of Kadush. There are many names and stories directly connected with masonry, but I think I should tell you about the last leader of the Knights Templar. His name was Jacques DeMolay, or as they say in history books, James of Malay." And so he told the story of Jacques DeMolay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, the crusader who was betrayed by Philip the Fair and burned at the stake in front of Notre Dame Cathedral on March 18th, 1314. The story and the name caught the imagination of the boys. Here was heroism. Here was a great example of loyalty, of courage. Here was a theme of knighthood and chivalry at its best, and the name of a martyr to fidelity and toleration. The boys were ready without further consideration to accept this name as the name of the group. But Land interrupted. "Now let's wait just a little bit and sleep over this. Let's not rush into it. Perhaps with a little more thought we can come up with a better name, one that might be more in keeping and more appropriate. It is growing late and you should all be going home. Come back next week and bring a few more of your friends. We will talk more together about it then. Good night, and thanks for coming." During the next few weeks, the boys found time and excuses to talk to Land and to ask questions about this new club and to learn more of the exciting march of history, the eternal search for the meaning of existence, and the stirring moments of the decline of the Order of the Knights Templar in the twilight of the Crusades. The name of DeMolay carried the story of the past into the present, and the boys wanted to know more of this period of history. The name of DeMolay began to carry to them the vision of a search for the ideal that not only carried a challenge in the long ago, but was a challenge to the youth of their day, as it would be for the youth of all time. They did not realize that within every boy and man is the desire to become the best that he can become. At times a desire is hidden so deep that it does not seem to exist, but it is always there. It is mankind's relentless search for a secret out of the past that will lead to a holy grail. For like these boys, we must all dream a while and then follow the gleam of all we hold to be true and good and beautiful. One evening, Land told them how a spirit of dedication to an ideal led two young French noblemen, Hugo de Payens and Geoffrey of St. Aldemer, to form the Order of Knights Templar in the year 1123. Their purpose was to give protection to pilgrims as they made their journey to the Holy Land. He told of how these two took upon themselves vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and how the seal of their order pictured these vows on its great seal, which showed the two founders riding one poor thin horse. King Baldwin of Jerusalem, he explained, gave them room in the royal palace, and as the palace was situated in the area of the temple, They became known as the Templars. Then, he continued, in the course of time this order grew immensely powerful and wealthy. It is said that in the 13th century they possessed 9,000 manors, preceptories, and priories in Europe alone. Even brothers of princes came eagerly to serve as humble knights under their leadership. As the years passed, they received alternating praise and censure. But a recent historian, who has little of good to say for them, does make this statement. They always stood where the swords flailed most fiercely and the arrows fell most thickly on the battlefield. They had immense courage at a time when courage meant more to Christian survival in Syria than did the ritual mouthing of prayers. I remember, interrupted one of the boys, that in Scott's Ivanhoe the black villain was a Knight Templar. But how did the Templars check out? It was this way. On October 13th, 1307, the members of the order assembled for what they had been led to believe was the launching of a new crusade. Instead, they were arrested and imprisoned. The order came to an end. Land paused and reflected, but not quite. From the ashes of fire and death and the pain of persecution rose the present orders of Knights Templar and the degrees of the Scottish Rite. I believe it was given vitality and worth to all generations, including our own. You see, we are still writing and making history as we take our places in the long march of those who lived that the good would become a part of time itself. While the boys talked to Land about the club when they came to the temple, it was their long talks together at school and as they walked from school to home that heightened their interest and gave momentum to their organization. One afternoon, after a chemistry class, Elmer Dorsey caught up with Louis Lower to ask, "Louis, I think this club idea is terrific, but what is it all about? What does Mr. Land get out of it? Do they want us to become junior masons?" Louis placed his arm around Elmer's shoulders. They sat down on the stone steps overlooking the athletic field with Linwood Boulevard in the distance. "I don't have all the answers, Elmer. I only know that Frank Land is one of the greatest. His only motive is the one he tells us. He likes to be with young people and sincerely believes that if we do form such a group, each of us will benefit from it. How he ever talked the older boys into letting us use their temple is beyond me. They must be as interested in us as Land is, because he has told me that we are not to be a junior Masonic group. He told me these men are concerned about only one thing, and that is that we should grow into decent men who will be respected in the community." Thanks a lot, Louis. Let's get in back of this and bring some of the other fellows with us for the next meeting. By the way, when is it to be? Next Monday, March 24th, about 7:30. Pass the word along. March 24th, 1919 was the day in history that launched the Order of DeMolay. During the next few years, however, the date of March 18th, the date in the past that had witnessed the death of Jacques DeMolay, came to be more frequently used. The death of DeMolay and the beginning of a club seemed synonymous, and when this significant date became a ritual part of the club, the date March 18th was used for both events. This date was to become a symbol out of the past to give a setting and time for the organizational date of DeMolay. 31 boys, all from the same high school, came to the Scottish Rite Temple that night. Frank Land quietly watched them and perhaps looked beyond them into the future. He made each boy welcome and then explained briefly his ideas of a club, what they might do, and the activities in which they might engage. He explained, "But this is your meeting. I will serve as advisor, but it is your meeting. Why not proceed with an organization and elect a few officers? I will take charge until you have completed your election." There was too much to talk about that night to do more than elect Gorman A. McBride as temporary president and Louis G. Lower as temporary secretary. The name, they thought, was of such great importance that it should come first in this meeting of organization. DeMolay had been talked about among the first 9 since their first meeting and told to the others. Now it was officially and unanimously adopted, with the name of the club to be the DeMolay Council, To keep the age of interest the same as theirs, they placed a requirement for membership for those coming into the club as being at least 16 and decided that when one of their group reached the age of 21, he should retire from the club. It was not until the meeting held on April 8, 1919, that officers were finally elected with Gorman A. McBride as the first president of the DeMolay Council. Lester Pennington was elected to serve as vice president, Lewis G. Lower to be the secretary with John Miller as treasurer, and Clyde Stream as sergeant at arms. Perhaps Land had talked to some of the men, or perhaps the idea he had for the club was even then taking form, for on April 15, 1919, the titles of the officers changed. One more was elected, and they became Gorman A. McBride, Master; Lester Pennington, First Warden; Averell C. Tatlock, Second Warden; Lewis G. Lower, Scribe; John Miller, Treasurer; Clyde Stream, Sentinel. During the next few months, the group grew in numbers, in activities, and in interest. Then a fear came to some of them that they were growing into too large a group. Gorman A. McBride, in later years, told the story in this manner. I recall that our membership rose to a little over 60, and some of the fellows were very much concerned about the organization getting too large. Someone suggested that I appoint a committee to talk with Mr. Land and endeavor to convince him that we should limit our membership to 75. The committee waited on Mr. Land, and in his quiet, humble, and modest manner, he received us and treated us as courteously as anybody could be treated. Of course, we presented our ideas about limiting the membership of DeMolay. He didn't criticize us, nor did he admonish us at the time. In fact, we didn't know whether he agreed or disagreed with our suggestion. Later, when the meeting was called to order, I called on the chairman to report. He reported and moved that the membership of DeMolay be limited to 75. The motion quickly received a second and was unanimously adopted. It was then that Dad Land rose from the back of the room where he had been more or less out of sight, for he wasn't the type to take the spotlight or the forefront in our meetings. He wanted us to conduct our own meetings. He depended upon us to do what was right and in keeping with what he had in mind for the order of DeMolay. But as he came to the front of the room that night, he proceeded to tell us, and in no uncertain terms, how selfish and how inconsiderate we were. He told us that we were operating and thinking absolutely contrary to every idea that he had in mind for this organization. He reminded us that there were 3 other high schools in Kansas City which had young men who were just as capable, just as qualified, and just as upstanding as we were. In fact, he indicated he thought they were probably much, much better than what we thought we were. He said that if it was good for one boy, it must be good for all eligible boys. He reminded us that, to become big, we must be big. Anyway, we felt very much ashamed of ourselves, and the motion to limit membership to 75 was rescinded. It was then that DeMolay was permitted to grow and develop. In this manner, Frank Land encouraged his boys as he gently led them with a light but firm hand on the reins.